Now, we hope many of us have learned the hard way after we burned our fingers. But again, this agreement, though, it opened a window of opportunities for many. We all are aware that also that it needs nurturing cooperation, understanding from all corners. Peace has all friends and beneficiaries. No one will lose nothing from peace, but unfortunately, it's human nature. Not everybody would be happier, or not everybody would be cooperative in building peace process. So we'll brief you how we've been through in all this process, and also the steps that we've been taken and expectations from our partners, and next steps of implementation that the government is trying to bring about to move forward. The AU Commission has done an excellent job from the inception to the conclusion. The Republic of South Africa provided the most ideal conditions for the talks. AU high-level panel led by His Excellency Obasanjo and supported by Kenyatta and Dr. Fumzile provided wisdom and patiently guided the process to the successful conclusion. We thank all partners who supported this process as observers. We might not agree on everything, but many partners provided valuable advice. It is time also now to revitalize relationships since the conflict is over. With regard to the process, we've briefed the diplomatic community in the past on our preparation. The high-level peace committee guided the process. The parties handled most issues directly. We designed a small working group format to work on texts. The discussions were cordial and substantive. The AU-level panel was instrumental in the critical areas. The manner difficult issues were resolved would not leave room for conflicting interpretations. As such, the process was thorough. There had been several back and forths, several challenges. We had to be assisted by our friends, particularly the panel. His Excellency Obasanjo has guided us patiently. Uhuru Kenyatta has played a very much instrumental role in bringing us together at times of very much difficulties. So we made it through assistance of our colleagues. Also the very commitment from both sides to somehow break the deal and then to put the conflict behind us and move forward. Because on both sides we've seen the colossal damage that has brought up on our people. So there was a will, but we understood also challenges, because on both sides there were perceptions, misperceptions, and a huge deficit of trust. So we both agreed on the process and the imperative of resolving the conflict and reach to certain kind of deal to extricate our people from the quagmire of conflict. But there had been serious mistrust, and so we had to shuttle several times so that we have to come up on the same page. And the panels have played very much instrumental role. But again, basically, we alone, both sides, had to discuss in Amharic, because we know each other. We know at times of difficulties, we know also times of jubilees. So it would be easier for us, because most of us would know personally with erstwhile friends. So we're also eager to create that mood so that we could collaborate to help our country move forward and unshackle that the problems that we've been through. With regard to contents of the agreement contains a preamble explaining our determination to resolve the conflict peacefully. We have objectives, principles serving as lasting commitments, some of which are detailed in the agreement, others are self-executing, such as respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ethiopia and upholding the federal constitution. So we had to agree on the objectives first, and it was easier. And then we had to agree on the principles, and that guided us to deliberate on the contents, which also gave us the right framework. Others, such as permanently silencing the guns, restoring the constitutional order in the Tigray region, respecting federal authority, or that Ethiopia has only one national defense force, are provided with implementing provisions. Some of the provisions with immediate implementation included the following. First, we've agreed to stop fighting immediately and permanently. Second, we've agreed to stop hostile propaganda and rhetoric. Third, the ANDF will enter into Mekelle. This has multiple reasons. Fourth, an open channel of communication between senior commanders would be established. Fifth, we will implement a DDR program for the TPLF combatants. With regard to stop fighting immediately and permanently, the word is ceasefire, stop cessation of hostilities. There are a lot of practices and semantics, but we've agreed to avoid semantics and focus on the essence because the issue is closer to us than the prior experiences. So we took lessons, but we focused on our own context. So that's why in some corners the issue was bandied as first cessation of hostilities, then to work on the permanent ceasefire. But for us, that would entail having a luxury of time. So we said we have to stop fighting immediately, and that has to entail a permanent ceasefire because we don't have to just stop fighting for now and then keep on talking, whereby either of us might have an excuse to revert back to the conflict. So everything has to be concluded then. That's why it took us more than a week. So that has to be dealt with, and I think it was to the best interest of both sides, particularly the people on the ground who've been undergoing the challenges and sustained colossal damage. The sixth was the TPLF will respect the authority of the federal government to deploy the NDF and other law enforcement agencies because that is the prerogative of the federal government under the federal constitution. Then the issue that federal government has been fighting was also to ensure law and order and to uphold constitution. And so it was to the best interest of both sides if the country has to hold on and continue. Seventh, the TPLF will stop conduct that undermines the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ethiopia, including unconstitutional correspondence and relations with foreign powers, because external relations under federal constitution only falls under the ambit of federal government, and no regional authority is allowed to form relations. As the government on its part will continue restoring services and expediting humanitarian aid. This was not part of the negotiation, but because the agreement would pave the way and avoid the problems, then we had to put that the agreement that we've reached would also pave the way for a smooth flow of aid without anybody would have an excuse to trample with the flow of aid. The 10th was ANDF shall safeguard all of Ethiopia's international borders and also airspace, because during the conflict we faced on both sides, from the air and on the ground, that our territorial integrity and borders were violated. So we are busy fighting each other, we're busy undermining each other. That paved the way for a third party to undermine us further. So the only way we saved the country was to avoid such opportunities for a third party to undermine us, and because safeguarding the border, international border and airspace belongs to the federal government, and also federal government has to assume responsibility for that. We had to agree, and that was also provided within the agreement. 11th point was the federal government will take control of federal institutions in Tigray. There are a lot of federal institutions, airports, airstrips, universities, both economic and social infrastructures. And so for that, the federal government has to have access and easy control without resistance, and that was also agreed. It doesn't undermine the other party because it already was prerogative of the federal government, and it only meant to be understood by both sides. 13th, we've agreed to a mechanism to monitor the implementation of permanent cessation of hostilities led by the AU high-level panel and supported by African experts. We provided how many experts might be adequate, and then also with other technological assistance. So the execution of this agreement must be monitored well and verified, and that has to be owned again by the Africans with the participation of both sides from Ethiopia. This listing is just for illustrative purposes. Other provisions that would require time and step-by-step implementation include establishing interim administration, political dialogue, and transitional justice. Because one of the triggering factors, at least the factors that add for both sides to fall out, was the holding of election, which was outside the constitution in Tigray. And that was also one of the elements which put federal government and TPLF at odds. So that had to be sorted out once we've agreed to uphold federal constitution and also to respect federal authorities. So we need actually the election to be held in Tigray, because our people in Tigray must be also represented in the Parliament and House of Federation, and that could only be through the election which could be held by the Federal National Board of Election. So for that, election must be held, but until election could be held, then we need to have interim administration. That administration must be also inclusive. There are a lot of political parties in Tigray too, including now, once this agreement holds and once we move forward, the federal government would approach the parliament to reconsider the designation of the terrorism of the TPLF. Then there may be opportunities for TPLF to run as a civil political party than both armed and civilian wing. So any political party that is armed itself could not run for election, because having access to coercive roles belongs to the elected government. So once a party is elected, then once controls the government, regional or federal, then you have access to use those arms. But you cannot be armed while you are a political party. So that's why some friends might be confused when we say disarmament of TPLF. Then we are not denying the right of the region of Tigray to have arms. Regions have arms that are standardized. Federal government can hold arms, which is stipulated in laws. Then the Tigray region can have also those arms, adequate police force, adequate special force, adequate militia. That is pertinent to the land area of the Tigray to control, and the population to police. It has to correspond with that. But again, that belongs to the regional government of Tigray, not to a particular party, because there are almost 5 political parties, and none of them could have access to arms unless they are elected and be in office. So that is the logic when we say that. Political dialogue, we have political issues which strictly fall between federal government or Prosperity Party and TPLF, but others which are pertinent to the national import. So those which are not pertinent to TPLF and the government would be dealt by the National Inclusive Dialogue, which now we are handling. Issues which are only pertinent to TPLF and the government or Prosperity Party could be handled bilaterally between both parties after moving forward. Transitional justice assumes it has both parts. One, the conflict now transcended into the damage, the ripple effect has affected civilians. It has also affected the social fabrics. And then we have to induce the process of healing. And we have to also nurture our social fabrics for the community to pull together. The other aspect, it has also entails accountability, because some of atrocities committed cannot simply be foregone within the pretext of cessation of hostilities with the pretext of also transitional justice. That includes both accountability and then again nurturing social cohesion and healing and forgiveness process. Issues could not only be dealt with in courts. Some social aspects must be dealt with communal discussions and forgiveness and reconciliation. So we also would like to embrace on that, and we've agreed upon these aspects. Next steps in the implementation of the agreement. Some of these steps require immediate action, such as opening channel of communication between senior commanders. We took the initiative. We sent the phone number of our Chief of Staff, Field Marshal Brhanu Jula, to the TPLF side. They did not call, and then again we received their part yesterday. We also passed that for our Chief of Staff last evening. I did not check, but they must have talked. At least from our side, we vow to begin to start every process to move ahead and to show the lead. The other second aspect is once the commanders opened communication channel, in 5 days, in the agreement it was indicated that commanders must meet and discuss as to how to implement the agreement. Now we are going to head to Nairobi as of tomorrow, and both commanders will meet in Nairobi on Monday. Then they will sort out the agreement which is indicated to be dealt with by the fighting forces, particularly in the armed areas. For other activities such as DDR, we've included maximum times limit, outer bound for heavy weapons, disarmament and light weapons for the TPLF combatants. We have reasonable time for TPLF to hand over heavy armaments which do not belong to any region, which could not and should not be belong to any political party. That has to be handed over to our army. And light weapons could be collected. The amount adequate for Tigray region will remain there and to be handed over for the government, which would be formed first transitional administration, and then for the permanent Tigray regional administration after the election under the constitutional manner could be held. Here the fact is we've agreed on total disarmament, on demobilization and reintegration. We will quickly move to agree on a plan. It needs detailed plan. So once the commanders would meet, then that will also require civilian leadership. So we'll work on this process, but it's also agreed, which paved the way. We've already started publicizing the agreement. Our people are massively celebrating the agreement. The Prime Minister had set the tone once the agreement was signed. Yesterday, the Prime Minister presided over the regional presidents, ministers at the federal and party officials. So the decision he passed and directions he gave was, it's unfortunate that we've been fighting. All the losses had been minus from Ethiopia. All the losses weakened us. So we've sustained colossal damage. Now, it's not time now to keep on leaking the wounds, but we have to move forward and rekindle hope back to our people. For that, regions have vowed to solicit resources from their own to assist areas which are afflicted by the conflict, both in the Amhara Afar region and particularly also in Tigray region, because most of the conflict was being run there, even though parts of Amhara and parts of Afar region have been affected. Of course, areas which have been affected by the conflict are many. We have in Gambela, we have in Benshangul, we have in Oromia region. So those regions could at least be better off on their own, though they also need some assistance from our partners, federal government. But now, as a basis to also rekindle hope and also reignite that social bond, regions would solicit resources to go and help the people in Tigray. That also reconnects the social fabrics. Again, federal government would do its best to solicit resources. Our partners would also be encouraged. These are the fundamental pointers. Thank you very much for your listening.